Before we get into the video, I need you guys to do me a favour. Number 1, like the video. Also comment, let me know your thoughts on the case. Crime boss Jason Cox and brothers Craig Cox and Lee Cox made up the notorious Salford crime gang, commonly known as the Cox Brothers or the Cox Gang. At the height of lockdown, the known gangsters, who according to police were said to have put over 200 kilos of coke on the Merseyside and North of England streets, had meticulously planned to rob £1 million worth of high purity coke from a Liverpool stash house. Now owned and curated by the same Merseyside gang the Cox brothers had regularly purchased coke from. Effectively, they were robbing their own supplier, and of course, that gang cannot be named for legal reasons. To pull off such a dangerous feat of robbing a known drug crime boss and take their product, £1 million worth, would set the Cox brothers up for life. It would also make them a target, and there would be severe repercussions. So the Cox brothers teamed up with Liverpool crime boss Richard Caswell, who was also known as Will, and again he was a known big-time dealer. Now in the Cox crime family, 35-year-old Jason Cox was the unquestioned leader. He was the brains of the operation and firmly believed that the Cox gang could come out on top in any situation unscathed. So, in spring of 2020, while most of the UK were confined in their homes, Jason and Lee and Craig and Richard Caswell had placed tracking devices on their rivals' vans and cars in order to find their stash house. Now, it was alleged that Richard Caswell knew the rough location, as he was the one who first presented the idea to rob their supplier. However, he could not be sure, as the Class A gear was regularly moved from property to property around the city. So, the known gangsters had monitored the different locations the rivals' cars had driven to and noticed a property on West Derby was a point of interest. So, 4 gangsters piled into a white van: Jason Cox, Craig Cox, Richard Caswell, and Jason's enforcer, Benjamin Monks Gorton, who Jason often described as a wall. They had driven to the semi-detached house on Croxdale Road West. Jason and Co already knew the house was used to stash coke and there would be people protecting the property. So Jason, Craig, Richard and Benjamin armed themselves with axes, machetes, bats and other items. In order to not rouse suspicion from the neighbours, Benjamin dressed up as a delivery driver, putting on a high-vis and also a mask. As Benjamin walked forward, box in hand, they noticed the front door was already ajar. It was open. That was all the opportunity the gang needed. The gangsters then rushed inside. As quick as the men inside, only a father and son could turn round. They were struck by all 4 men in an onslaught that was described as savage and brutal. In fact, so brutal that the older man nearly lost an arm, the wound going right down to the bone. Now Jason then ran through room by room, picking out bags of coke. The panicked son called 999, screamed to the operator there were men inside and they had stabbed me and my dad. There's red everywhere. That call only entrapped himself and his dad into the fact that they were looking after the Merseyside gangsters' coke, because Jason and Co had fled the house with 30 kilograms of high purity coke, which police estimated to be worth £1 million at street value. Now the older man was screaming in pain, and when they were asked why men had ran inside the house and caused such a scene, they forgot to mention that drugs were the reason, as they were scared of their boss, of course. Now Jason and Craig Cox, Richard Caswell and Benjamin Monks Gorton fled the scene and drove away in their van to an address in Warrington. Some of the coke was sold on to Leon Atkinson, who was an associate of notorious gangster Dale Cregan. The aftermath of the audacious heist showed Jason and Lee and Craig and Richard and Benjamin brag and boast about the success of their drug haul. Jason also told everyone not to utter a single word, as it could bring unwanted attention. Now Jason also bragged that he had a full clip and would empty it on the main man himself, show the old what time it is. Now Lee was also asked to rent a flat in case word got back to the Cox brothers were involved in the theft. Ironically, the owners of the coke had asked Robert Caswell if he knew who stole their stash and demanded information, as they had spotted Jason's grey Audi and the same white van idling in the area in the days leading up to the theft. Now Richard Caswell pretended that he knew nothing about it and says that he would do some checks. Instead, he went back to Jason and told him what was happening. There were then allegations that there was CCTV of the theft, and they also knew that Benjamin had dropped his mask at the scene. However, Jason Cox was still optimistic because Benjamin belonged to the traveller community and was described as a wall, and he was not known to the Merseyside gangsters, so there's no way that they could put Benjamin with the Cox brothers. The Cox brothers and Richard Caswell were all notorious in their own rights in Salford, Manchester and Greater Manchester. However, when French authorities had to EncroChat in 2020, they gave police unrestricted access to the messages from the Cox brothers as well as Robert Caswell. The messages showed that Caswell was the first person to suggest that they robbed the supplier. The mask left at the scene was tested for DNA, and it led back to Benjamin Monk Scorton, who of course the police put them in a frame with the Cox brothers. Now the fallout after the arrest could not be understated. Homes and businesses were burned down, and a bounty put on the Cox brothers reached over £100,000, and Richard Caswell was in H&P Manchester suffering from serious injuries. He did not help the prison guards with the investigation or the police. Now Jason Cox was jailed for 14 years, Craig Cox was jailed for 13 years and 6 months, Lee Cox was jailed for 8 years, and Richard Caswell was jailed for 7 years. And as you can imagine, there was no honour amongst gangsters or crime bosses. Stay safe.